Right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm here with Colleen.
Hello.
And today our guest is Lisa Campion. Hi, Lisa.
Hello. So nice to be here today.
We're so glad to have you. We'll go ahead and get started with your story in a second, but I just wanted to say just a little bit about Lisa. She is a professional psychic, counselor, Reiki master teacher, and energy healer, and also best-selling author of The Art of Psychic Reiki. So just want to say hi. And as always, we just like to get started with your story because that's how we're going to get to know you best. So, what brought you into these modalities? We could talk about Reiki, of course, but I think you started in your psychic work and psychic abilities and gifts first, correct?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so I was born in the 60s, just outside of Boston, and I was one of those really like psychic children. One of those I see dead people kids. And back then it was really strange. It was really weird. You weren't really allowed to talk about it. And I spent a lot of time like trying to figure out what was going on. Of course, I grew my house was super haunted, like one of those big Victorian houses and super haunted. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was going on, I was experiencing, trying to sort of pretend to be normal in public at the same time when there wasn't a lot of information about this. And so I would see spirits, I would see energy around people, auras. I'm mostly a visual psychic, but I also feel and know things and hear things. I would have like I call them the gray people that I would wake up in the middle of the night and the gray people would be standing around my bed. And they were the uneasy spirits of the dead, ghosts, and they'd come around and try to talk to me. And my parents were hippies, which I feel sort of lucky that they were because they were pretty open about it. But of course, they didn't know either. My mom was like, "Oh, you have such a great imagination." Um, but I did get some really beautiful spiritual training. So, like when I was 10, we all went to transcendental meditation because that's what you did when you were a hippie in 1974. Like so. I learned transcendental meditation when I was really young, and I had this really interesting experience with Maharishi, who, of course, I didn't know who he was until I was an adult, but he was doing like these, you know, darshan on everybody, like initiations on everybody. So he'd take people into this back room one at a time, and he would speak to you through a translator and sort of give you a blessing and give you a mantra. And he was like, blah, blah, blah. And then he looked at me, he was like, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." He was like, "You have a gift, but I think it's going to be really hard for you if you'd grown up in my country, India, we would know what to do with you, but because you're growing up in the United States, which is basically spiritually bankrupt, so that's what he said, not me. Um, you're out of luck. So your childhood's going to be really challenging, but you need to hang in there because you're going to help a lot of people when you're an adult." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, thank you." Somebody saying so, acknowledging what I was experiencing. And I didn't realize who he was until much, 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 much later. I went to college, I studied comparative religion, and I was like, and then I put the two pieces together, and that was kind of a pivotal turning point in my life and also in my life as a psychic. So I carried on the best I could until I went to college in 1982. And it was the dawn of the new age. All of a sudden there was new age books and stores and teachers. So sort of when I got my first um training, although my parents did take me to so it was used to be called Silva Mind Control. Now it's called the Silva Method. And it when I was in high school. So I did all 7 levels of that, and it was incredibly powerful psychic training for a psychic. Like I've been very lucky in a lot of ways, that I had exposure to these things. I also studied martial arts when I was young, and that was sort of my first understanding of energy and how energy could flow and how to use and manipulate energy. But then I started working as a psychic when I was still in college, so I was 19 and did that for a little bit, but quickly learned that I just didn't know enough to actually be able to help people. So I would deliver the message and then they would cry or have some emotional reaction. I was like, I don't know what to do now because I'm 19, you know? So I went back to school and became a therapist. Um, and then for a long time, I just combined those things, psychic reading and therapy. It was a great combination. It was more coming in as a psychic, but the therapy training I had would help sort of support what was coming up in the psychic readings. And then in 1999, I learned Reiki. So it was 25 years ago. And back then it was still pretty fringy, it was pretty like also kind of a weird thing to do. And I included Reiki and since then into my practice. And since then I've learned many other energy healing modalities. Kind of like mash that all up. And these days I mostly train other people. So I teach Reiki, I teach psychic development courses. I help empaths also understand their gifts. And I feel like my mission in life, is I want to train an army of healers to go out there and save the world because it needs saving right about now. And so many, I think, people like us have been called to this. So I feel like we chose to be born on this planet at this time so we could help the evolution and ascension of humanity. Like, we came here to do that. And I really, really love helping other people um, get a handle on their gifts. So whether it's learn Reiki or develop their psychic skills, um, and kind of give them all the things that they need to maximize their gifts as a healer so they all can go out and do the work they're meant to do in the world. Yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I've written 4 books in the past 5 years, and I have a lot of training programs. I still do some private work, but mostly I'm teaching and writing.
Well, can you tell us the names of your books and kind of what they're, just a summary of what they're about?
Yeah, you bet. So my first book is called The Art of Psychic Reiki. And that is, kind of a blend, like what happens when we study Reiki. A lot of times what happens is our latent psychic abilities really pop to the surface. And I think that's a good thing. So, and many Reiki trainers didn't know what to do with that. So people would train Reiki and their psychics would open and they'd ask their teachers, what do I do about this? And the teachers were like, I don't want to talk about that. That's not part of Reiki, right? So I wrote a book about how do we merge them together? How do we blend them? How do we use them? Because I think it's a great tool when we're Reiki practitioners to be able to tap into our intuition and our psychic ability. And then I wrote a book called Energy Healing for Empaths, and that is to help people who are sensitive and empathic understand how to manage their energy because empaths are really meant to be healers. We're the healers, helpers, caretakers of the world. And that's really, really challenging and difficult for us until we learn how to manage our energy. Then it's amazing. Then I wrote a book called Awakening Your Psychic Ability, which is straight up psychic development. Really, really good place to start. And I think there's sort of a myth or misconception that you're born psychic, and if you're not born psychic, you're out of luck. There's nothing you can do. And that's not true. Psychic ability is like any ability. It's like athletic ability, musical ability. We all have some. And no matter how much we have, we still have to train. We still have to work. It's like a muscle.
Yeah.
And, then when we do those things, so that book is about how some tools and what is it like to develop our psychic ability. Then I wrote a journal to go with that called the Psychic Awakening Journal. That's a prompted journal, kind of like it's more like a workbook to help go teach exercises and go through. Because one of the first things I recommend my psychic students do is create a journal and get a composition notebook and write psychic journal on it, and then record all of your card pulls, your dreams, your intuitive hits, as they're so ephemeral, right? And if we don't record them and we just forget them like minutes later, and when we record them, they stick with us more. It's sort of a really good way to bring it forward into your consciousness and practice it, and then your psychic ability gets stronger. So that's the 4.
Yeah. Wow. Great books and great topics because we agree. And, my original background, I started in all of my training little bit older than you, and my parents weren't hippies. So, but I really relate to your story of back in those days, there just really wasn't any identification, training for those of us with those skills. And so interesting that the Maharishi, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. Maharishi said to you that, in his country, you would be identified as a child. And I think of that all the time. We would have been identified in another culture as
Right.
children, and trained and taught the skills. And I know for myself, my parents were kind of like yours. Well, not kind of like yours, because yours did more to help you develop it. They didn't specifically suppress it, but they also really, neither of them were really empathic. My mom probably had some psychic abilities, but so I would say that for myself, it wasn't until I was in my 40s. And
Right.
even though I grew up in San Diego and Encinitas, right by the Self-Realization Fellowship,
Yes.
Yogananda's
Yes.
place. Oh, so you're familiar with that.
Yeah. That's beautiful. He's one of my favorite spiritual teachers.
Absolutely. Well, I lived there. I spent so much time on that land. I had horses and was always riding on that land. It used to be called, well, it's still called Swami's, the beach there. But anyway, there just weren't really those opportunities to learn this. And so the same thing, I received Reiki in 2000 after 3 years of shamanic training. And I discovered the same thing, that it was there really wasn't a lot of information about the psychic ability that wakes up
Yeah.
from Reiki.
Yeah, there really wasn't. And I mean back then this was hard for sort of younger people to really get their heads around, but there was like no internet. There was
That's right.
no books in the library really, about it. And so there was just I got a lot of my early, this is a funny story, but I got a lot of my early psychic development training by watching horror movies. So I had this like revolutionary moment when I was 12 and I snuck into the movie theater because my parents wouldn't let me go to see the movie Poltergeist.
Yeah.
And there's this psychic in there, like a professional psychic. And I think I was probably 12. And I was looking at her going, oh my God, you can do that. I'm going to do that. And it was that moment where I decided I was going to be a professional psychic. And then she said this little thing about like what ghosts are and why they get stuck and how you help them cross over. And I was like, oh my God, somebody knows something. Somebody knows something. And so I started watching horror movies like crazy, ghost stories, and I got a pretty wacky education. Like maybe 50% of it was real and the other 50% of it was crazy Hollywood nonsense. But that was the other place where I could find, and I would drag my friends with me to see these ghost story movies, because I just really wanted validation. I was like, see, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one. Like, this is a thing, you know? So I'm just so grateful that nowadays there's so much more. There's paranormal TV, there's psychics on TV, there's, you know, TikTok psychics, which is sort of a different topic. Some of them are good and some of them really don't know it much. They think they do, but they don't. And but anyway, there at least for the most part, the conversation is being had in a way that doesn't, somebody's not going to drag you to the mental hospital because you're seeing angels and talking to dead Uncle Fred, you know?
That is just so true. And relating to the movies, I remember when The Sixth Sense came out and thinking, why don't they teach him what to do? And, finding out that afterwards, it's like, well, there was no normalcy in training back
Right.
then. It's funny that you say how much more there is now. In one of the podcasts not too long ago, I think I said, well, we really are the mainstream. And then a woman that we know said, no, not quite yet. So But I thought, well, we kind of live like normal mainstream lives, right? So,
Well, also where we are plays into that. We're outside
well,
of
that's
Portland,
true.
Oregon, and so yeah, it is relatively normal here, but not everywhere.
Mhm.
It's funny because I was gonna say I kind of had the opposite experience growing up. I was raised in all of this, right? I started in when Colleen started in shamanism, I was around what 10, 12, somewhere in there. And I would be surrounded by all of that. I got my first soul retrieval around there, my Reiki attunements when I was a teenager. But Lisa, one of the things that you said about, when you were talking about your books, I actually kind of went the opposite way when I went into college of like, needing to find my own path with
Yeah.
all of it. And there's a couple of things that when you were talking about your books as, you know, one of the things that we teach too is that it's a skill like any other skill that it's something that you can develop even if you weren't born with the gifts like you have or, Colleen has. And for the longest time, I thought that it wasn't possible for me to have any sort of psychic impressions or intuitive gifts or even have those things be a part of my Reiki practice because it wasn't quite like Colleen, right? She's always had that great level of empathy. She's a very creative person. And so I always thought that if I wasn't like that, then it wasn't for me. No, I remember saying, no, I'm not intuitive. I don't have intuition for the longest time. And how then learning through this process and through Reiki and the different ways that we teach and stuff too is that, oh wait, I do, it just looks different, right? I just have a different way that this all manifests for me, than say somebody like Colleen or somebody like you that was born with it so strongly and such a gift. And now having been through that process for a long period of time, really knowing how it works for me and how different it is for me, and that is equally as valid, and that it is just a skill that I had to develop through a lot of unlearning first, which I'm sure
Yeah.
you see a lot of, Lisa, especially
Yeah.
from your point of view with it. Like you said, the media that teaches you it has to be a certain way. And
Yes.
while that can be helpful to have that common, that recognition, there's also so much that it gets wrong around it and that unlearning and then that relearning with it.
Yeah, it's such a great point. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of myths, that we have to work through, misconceptions. Um, and I sort of see two patterns. One of them are people like me whose psychic is wide open and they need help shutting it down,
Yeah.
closing it, controlling it. And maybe that's your natural state. Maybe, you worked with some plant medicine and that flooded the gates open for you, or, you studied yoga and, you did your yoga teacher training and that really opened you know, your psychic pathways. So there are a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to turn it off. They feel sort of overwhelmed by the information that's coming in. And then there are other people who are more like you, Robin, that are wanting to turn it on, that they're wanting to sort of boost and turn it on. And either way, it's, the process of opening is the same, um, kind of clearing our channels and getting out of the misconceptions. And I think one of the biggest ones is about the word see. So people say all the time, we have a like beautiful meditation or a psychic exercise, and people say, well, I didn't see anything. I'm not psychic because I don't see anything. But clairvoyance is really only one of many of the psychic senses. And if we change that word to perceive, or we change that word to experience, what did you experience? What did you perceive? Then we are open to, well, I felt this and I heard this and I knew this. And, you know, um, I felt this other thing in my body. Then all of a sudden we're accessing way more information that we might have been dismissing. And I also think it's so much more natural and so much easier than people expect it to be. So oftentimes they're like, oh, that old thing that happens to me 5 times a day, that's not special. Like, you have to be special, you have to be tortured. You have to like, the angel comes in and blows the trumpet in your ear, and you fall down and you have fits, and you foam at the mouth a little bit, or your head spins around. I don't know, like, you know,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and it's not really like that. I mean, sometimes it's like that, but not very often. It's more just woven into our everyday life, and people with sort of the knowing, the sense of knowing, the sense of feeling, or the feeling in your body, they just dismiss that. They're like, oh, everybody, that's not it. Everybody has that. And well, maybe everyone has that, but that's also it. That's like some of the most reliable, useful psychic information we get. The visual is people with really strong visual, they're the ones coming in and saying, how do I turn it off? Please help me turn it off. It's not all it's cracked up to be. And it's it just can be unwieldy and difficult. And the other senses are just as valid and even maybe more accurate.
Yeah. It's so true. Colleen is clairvoyant, and so she sees, but I'm claircognizant.
So
And
yeah.
so I know and think.
Yes.
So, and and what's interesting too is that part of what you talk about and teach about is the empathy as well, because it's not just the psychic abilities, although obviously empathy is a style of psychic abilities, but it is also people who need to manage their empathy to a really great degree as much as maybe their psychic abilities, where they need to, you said turn off it. I would say, like you said, kind of learn how to manage it in the ways that is livable. And empathy, I think,
Right.
is something that we see in the same way as well.
Absolutely. And all my students, whether they're empaths or psychic, and first of all, I think all empaths are highly psychic.
Yeah.
And they often are loaded with all of the clairs.
Yeah.
But we absolutely start with energy management. How do we psychic self-defense, right? And energy hygiene. How do we clear energy that may, because empaths are sort of like sponges, and we're called psychic sponges. So we tend to absorb the energy that other people, their thoughts, their feelings, the pain that they're having in their bodies. And if you think about it, it's a fantastic tool if you're a healer. It's like having a built-in MRI X-ray machine if you're a tooler, like if you're a healer. Those tools are so good because let's say you're a Reiki practitioner and you're an empath and you put your hands on somebody and you're like, oh, I feel it in their body. I feel it in my body. I feel their emotions. I can even hear what they're thinking because many empaths are very telepathic. And if we're in the healing world, or let's say we're working with children or working with animals or we're working with elders, which empaths are often drawn to do, we're just getting a huge amount of information about what the people we're working with need without them even saying anything. Sometimes they can't if they're babies or animals or plants or whatever, right? So we're getting this massive amount of information, and it's really, really overwhelming and pretty horrible to live that way unless you know how to release the energy, clear the energy you picked up from other people, um, shield yourself a little bit better, replace your lost energy because empaths tend to be kind of leaky. So they're, you know, absorb, like what's a sponge? A sponge, when the sponge is full, it leaks, right? So sponges are leaky and absorby at the same time. So when we get a handle, and that's when you don't want to get off the couch. You don't want to leave your house. You just want to be at home. It's too hard to be in the world. And we don't have to be that way. So when we learn these pretty simple, I think they're simple to do. The trick is to do them all the time. We strengthen our energy fields. We change our energy fields in a way where we can really go out and be in public and do the work that we came here to do. And there's this catch-22 that all empaths have to deal with. We're called to service, and being in service puts us in the line of fire in a way that makes it really uncomfortable to live. So that's why I wrote that book, Energy Healing for Empaths. It's really all about how do we manage our energy? How do we manage our emotions so that we can be of service?
We talk a lot about that in our animal Reiki course, because one of the things that when we first started working with it really years ago, I understood from students how often people felt as if they couldn't do the work because they couldn't manage their empathy, that
Yeah.
their empathy would take them so into the thought forms of grief around the animals in the world, that it actually made them withdraw from the ability. And
Yeah.
so that is one of the things that we teach, is to go into that higher level of your empathy, because we can also use our empathy to go into the higher frequencies of the thought forms that exist too.
Yeah.
And how that helps with the compassion fatigue, like you say, that often we find, I'm very empathic, and it took me years as a natural overgiver
Mm.
to learn how to not expend all of my energy, like you say, those leaks, trying to help, absorbing it, not knowing how to understand what was theirs and what was mine. And Reiki is actually what really helped with that, because we're using the energy of Reiki instead of our own life force. And that's when it started to shift for me, is when I could see, oh, wait, this is theirs, this is mine, and let Reiki do the work. But what you were talking about, you mentioned some specific tools that you teach that people can use. So can you go through some of those tools and techniques that you use or teach for people to take care of themselves and take care of their empathy?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a specific sort of grounding, clearing, and protecting routine that I teach start everybody with, whether they're empaths, Reiki practitioners, psychic students. They're, and it starts with really like, especially if you want to open the psychic channels. So centering, like we start with a centering experience, just kind of closing your eyes, taking some breaths, breathing into your heart, breathing into your belly, and I say recalling your energies, cutting the cords with whatever you were doing before you got here, just, and on the inhale breath, we just bring ourselves back, all the scattered, lost parts of ourselves that we're in our family, we're in our job, we're in traffic or wherever. We have to pull that sort of back in. And then connecting with sort of divine light. So imagining a big beam of light coming in the top of your head. That light comes from your own soul, from divine source. And as we breathe that light in the crown of the head and breathe, we can actually breathe it right into the pineal gland. And that light will open the upper chakras, switch on the pineal gland, sort of activate some of our psychic senses. And then we draw that light into the heart, and taking some moments to fill our hearts with light, to honor the incredible deep hearts we have as empaths and healers, to honor that we are a heart-centered people, you know. And on the exhale, to release anything we're carrying in our heart, any unprocessed grief, any of other people's emotions. You release it either out through your mouth or down through your legs and out the bottoms of your feet into the earth. Then we do the same thing into the belly. So we draw that light into the belly. And a lot of times empaths hold in their belly just the energy goo that we absorb from other people. And, if you have like a sensitive tummy or an anxiety belly, sometimes it's not, we all sometimes feel it in our stomachs, right? So we have to clear that out. So again, we honor with light on the inhale, we exhale down our legs and out the bottoms of our feet into the earth. And I always give a lot of gratitude to the earth for this process. So and ask the earth to throw it on the compost bin, like where earth knows how to transmute this energy, how to compost it, right? Then we bring that light down all the way down the spine to the tailbone. And as we come into the tailbone, we honor the body, our bodies, our physical bodies. We bless them for the amazing bioengineering miracles that they are. It's kind of incredible or how our bodies work. So then you can, fill your body with light, sort of directing to your body any place that's in pain or where you're feeling, not well. And again, releasing everything down into the earth. And then the next sequence, so that's clearing and filling. So that sequence clears out the energy that doesn't belong to us, refills with this divine light. I think empaths are tired a lot because that leaking that we do, we give up our own energy And I agree with you. As soon as we learn Reiki, then we're filling with, and we're filling with this universal, unlimited supply of energy instead of having to use our own. And this is the way that I see Reiki flow through us, this breathing process that we're engaging in. And then the next stage is to really make a connection to the earth. So you imagine your tailbone extending, or roots, or however you want to make that the grounding cord down into the earth. And feeling the light of the earth rise up to meet you and fill you that way, And then the last part of it would be directing that light, whether it's divine light or the light of the earth, to the outside edge of your energy field, because we all live inside our own bubble. That bubble is like a membrane that's on the outside edge of our field. And for empaths, it, instead of like a kind of more solid membrane, it's more like a sponge. It's very permeable and porous. So we use our imagination, our visualization to change that to be something more solid, like an eggshell, that you and everything that's used on the inside of the eggshell, the world's on the outside of the eggshell, nothing comes inside without your permission. And we use that light to repair any dents, dings, remove any cords, so that over time we strengthen this boundary. This is the natural boundary we have, sort of your first line of defense, when we do psychic self-defense. And then shining your light out into the world, so you can be the brightest light you can be. And that process, when you get it down, I can do it in like 4 or 5 breaths, 10 breaths. And I do it before I go into the big box stores, before I go into Costco, halfway through Costco, when you get out of Costco. And if I don't do it, I'm like lost in the back of Costco and I can't remember my name or where I parked my car, and I'm like crying, like, I'm lost. I can't find my way home.
So many people are going, oh, that's what that is.
Yeah. And then I do it in between sessions. I do it, like before and after a Reiki session, before I go to sleep at night. There's all the times, or anytime that I'm in sort of a difficult, I was on an airplane, I was in the airport, I was in the middle of downtown San Francisco, which has a lot of intense energy, in a big city. So, I'm standing in the, Chinatown in San Francisco yesterday, like doing this in the middle, because it was like, there's a lot going on there. So, when we know how to do that, there's like a magic. We can get off the couch and leave our homes and go out and be in the world and do all the things that we came here to do, as healers, and also to live wonderful lives as humans. When and if you don't have that foundational, and there's many other ways to do it, this is just how I do it. There's lots and lots of ways to do it, but having some way to do it so that you can ground, you can clear, you can protect, you can replace your lost energy. Those are the foundational things we all need.
Well, I think it's great too that you mentioned that you can do it in a few breaths, as well, because we live such busy lives, and we call it Reiki on the fly in that same concept. And then the other times when you take the time with it to really enjoy the experience of, developing that place around you and within you where you can, experience all of it. What would you say that you do? Let's say somebody, I call it getting splucked. Like you walk into something, it feels like just the energy came in and splucked you, it got through, or you forgot to do your taking care of yourself before you got there, or on a more serious level where somebody really is experiencing compassion fatigue because of their empathy. What tools do you recommend in those cases?
I think having a lot of tools is really good. So I wear an EMF shield, and when I'm out, because I think empaths are super, that's what this necklace is. Empaths are super sensitive to electromagnetic frequency, and that's cell phone towers, cell phones, computers, radios, fluorescent lights. And I find the EMF shield will filter all that out, but it also tends to filter out the empathic noise, so we just don't we're less susceptible to, that. I use flower essences a lot. Um, and some people like crystals, some people like gemstones. We all know about sage, and all those kind of tools we can use to I think I carry a tuning fork with me. So it's a 528 tuning fork, and it's really good for haunted hotel rooms. It's really good for clearing out the leftover residual energy in the places. So I have all of these things, crystals, flower essences, tuning fork, in a little bag that I carry with me when I travel. Um, so I think the more tools we have, the better. I think doing some self Reiki is really good. I'm all about getting in a bathtub filled with salt of any kind, Epsom salts or bath salts. Really, really helps. Um, and my go-to is the process that I shared with you already. Just a really quick breathing, grounding. Can you get barefoot on the ground for a minute? When our bare feet contact the earth, we're more grounded, like we can more easily ground. And then breathing in, having that intention to release what we picked up. The other trick that I love is, this is really very useful, excusing yourself to the restroom, because whatever's going on, you can always go to the restroom, and just washing your hands, taking a few breaths, breathe, 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 ground, ground, ground. And I'll say, like, as I'm washing my hands, let this water wash away anything I picked up. And we've got soap, let the soap clear, and wash away anything that I picked up. Ground, 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 breathe, 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 leave the restroom, and that little minute can get you out of any dicey family gathering, work situation, airport rush, where we, tend to collect these things. So I think having as many tools as we can, really, and some things work better for other people. I think people really enjoy having something tangible, something like the gemstone, the flower essence, the essential oil. All those things can be super helpful.
Yeah. I wanted to ask too, so one of the things that you said kind of in the beginning, this is a little bit of shifting topics. So but it's all related obviously, was just about how Reiki can really open those pathways to your psychic abilities. And something that, we talk about often too is that on day one of Reiki 1, that, and there's a lot of different things. Reiki's just one of them, like you said, especially plant medicine, things like that can really open those pathways as well. But you do see it in Reiki quite a bit.
Yeah.
And one of the, I would say, couple of commonalities is people perceiving colors. Is kind of one of the first things that happens for people. Oh, I experienced or perceived a lot of purple. It's one of the
Yeah.
ones, obviously, crown chakra. And also feeling things in their body, like, oh, I felt what, if I was working on somebody, I felt, there's something in the stomach. And so when I moved my hands there, I felt something in the stomach. So those are a couple of common ones in day one of Reiki 1. So um, I guess I don't really have a question, but maybe if you want to talk a little bit about what you've experienced as far as like teaching and having students that experience that, because where I want it to go to is eventually that we get into talking about intuition and psychic impressions and sessions, because I think,
Yeah.
like you said, normalizing this and talking about this is important because it happens for so many people when they learn Reiki and other things as well, but when they learn Reiki.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I always say Reiki, yoga, and meditation are like the trifecta, the gateways to opening your psychic abilities, and plant medicine too. We have to really include that now. But so many people just learn to meditate or start taking yoga or learn Reiki, and then all of a sudden their natural abilities pop open. And then I think it happens at each level. Level 1 tends to open people's capacity to feel and sense energy. So that's when you're gonna start feeling things. You feel maybe your hands tingling or pulsing in your hands. You feel, tingling, pulsing, heat, all the things that we sometimes feel when we're doing Reiki. Level 2 is the one that I feel like opens people's clairs. So there can be a massive spike at the level. There's something about the level 2 attunement. I think it's learning the symbols,
Yeah, I was gonna say the
and
distance
getting,
symbol,
yeah,
that connection. Yeah.
exactly, right. They just sort of open the pineal gland in a different way, and all of a sudden we're much more psychic. And then I think the level 3 attunements, the master level attunements, really, because they're so pure, they're so like opening the crown chakra even more, connecting us with divine energy even more. So people then sometimes feel direct experience with their guides.
Mhm.
So all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, there's an angel, there's something in the room with me, and I think it's an angel, or my client's dead mother showed up, or, like in the session all of a sudden. And that tends, I noticed that the master level, there's an increase in our connection with our guides and being able to connect with other people's guides. So that's kind of the way I see it. And I think all of them are great. All of them are so useful and beautiful. We just need to be prepared so we don't freak out, so we don't shut down, so we don't get afraid. So we learn to set boundaries, and understand like how to turn it off, and my thing is, especially if you're feeling things in your body, obviously we don't want to walk away from a Reiki session with somebody else's pain. And if you're an empath and you're used to absorbing stuff, that's real. The danger is real. But what I do is I feel it for like 10 seconds, long enough to identify, oh, it's backache, oh, it's this pain, it's a migraine, it's whatever it is. Then I'm like, thank you for the information. And I drop it down the ground, really, really, really deep breath, drop it down the grounding cord, put it on the compost bin. Like I appreciate the information and I don't need to have that anymore. Right. And we release that usually with my breath. So you'll see me go like, like a deep breath like that. And that's the release point where I'm not having it. I'm not bringing it home with me.
Observe, don't absorb.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for the information. Now I really understand. And then I also think it's important to ask, is this mine? And is it mine? And I'll say to my clients, well, are you feeling something? Do you have back pain? Or, how's your head feeling right now? Or how are you feeling right now? And they're like, oh, I'm doing great, except my back is killing me, and then, okay, now, and if it's mine, I'm like going to do the same thing. I'm going to use the breath to release it. And then, that gives us, I think, as psychics and as Reiki practitioners, we're a bit like detectives. We're continuing to ask questions or uncover what's going on with our clients. And okay, so back, so what's that about? Maybe it's just physical. Maybe there's emotions in there. Maybe there's spiritual causation for that, and we can kind of go into investigative mode and figure out where that is, and then help release it and heal it.
That's such an important point in Colleen. I see that you unmuted. I think that people don't realize how much you can dialogue with it all.
Mhm.
Whether it's the energy, whether it's what you're feeling, whether it's a spirit guide that you can
Yeah.
dialogue, ask questions, get
Yes.
clarification. Doesn't have to just be I'm doing what I'm told, although it's that too, but like you can have a further uh, deeper, conversation for lack of a better word with it all.
Right. Yeah, I think people like, well, I saw this thing or I felt this thing and I didn't know what to do. And then that's like the end of it,
Yeah.
and that doesn't have to be the end of it. So we go into inquiry, we investigate, we dig around, we ask questions until we know what's happening. And there's so much. I mean, I talk through my sessions. I'm
Yeah.
not like most Reiki practitioners. So because I'm combining a psychic reading with for me, the Reiki is in support of the psychic reading. So I'm talking through my whole sessions. I've always done that. And not every Reiki practitioner does that. But I do think it's okay. And, so you can, discuss that with your clients before you start, or like, do you want me to just, do you want to be quiet? And there's a lot of benefit to just being quiet through the whole session, because that person will really drop into a deep theta healing state. If we talk to them and we sort of can bring them out of that, and maybe that is a conversation you have at the end. And I think it's fine to take notes and write down your impressions, questions, sensations, and then chat about it at the end or in a follow up. Or if you have that agreement with your clients, you can talk through the session, you know. And I think es- especially if your client's having an emotional release, they're crying, talk to them, you know, are you okay? Are you okay? Like, what's going on? How are you feeling? And that many clients, people in general, don't get enough listening. Like, we are doing a massive healing for people just by showing up and listening to them really deeply. And we all need to be heard and seen and have our feelings validated and have someone hold space for our feelings. So all of that's totally possible in a Reiki session, and can and should happen.
Yeah, we do the same thing. We're both channelers as well. And sometimes, like you say, asking the client what their preference is, and also the ability to take notes, automatic writing during it can be another benefit for people too. I was going to bring up the idea of the sympathetic intuition, where you are picking up the physical pain of a client and then needing to release it. One of the things I had to learn about that same kind of idea was the mental and emotional things that I could pick up from them too.
Yeah.
And they would often seem to be my own. And
Yes.
I learned, like, wait a minute, this, like, why am I in this mind chatter in the middle of the session? Or why am I feeling really scattered in the middle of it? Or I'm emotional in the middle of it. And then asking in the session, not the client, but asking in the session, wait a minute, is this mine? Is this theirs? And watching it shift from, wait, this is theirs, this is not mine. And then, like you say, to not carry it with you afterwards, to use the skills to let it go and have it not be a part of it. But I think it's an important one for people to understand or know about, because a lot of times you'll get the people in a Reiki session and they'll think, well, what do you do to concentrate? Or what do you do to stay focused as the practitioner? And, for me, I'm highly focused in it, differently than in my daily life, differently than my daily brain. Because
Yeah.
my brain is, as Robin laughs when I say, because I have a lot of interests, my brain will go all over the place. But um, as you get to know what type of a practitioner you are, for me, that focus is, I'm very focused. And so when I'm not, it leads to the question, wait, is this theirs? Is this mine?
Right.
Or if I'm feeling particularly emotional, or particularly maybe I'm picking up on an argument in my head about something that I think is mine. Wait a minute, let me check in and find out, actually, is this going on for this person? Asking the energy, or even, like you say, you can't ask them.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. I love that. And I feel like it's a very meditative process doing a Reiki session. So it's like, what do we do when we're meditating and our mind wanders, right? We just bring our attention back, you know? So I think breathing, I find that energy flows with our breath, and making sure you're breathing really well, breathing deeply, like a 4 count ujjayi breath, like they do in yoga. And the energy's stuck in a session. I'm like, am I breathing? I'm always paying attention to my breathing. As I feel energy blocks, like I stop breathing, or I shallow breathe, or, there's some discomfort there. And I'm like, all right, breathe, breathe, breathe. So in a session, I'm always bringing my attention back to my breath. I'm always deepening my breathing if I want to clear a block or if I'm feeling a block. And then I'm sort of observing, like you do when you're meditating, right? What's going on? What's my mental chatter? What's my emotional chatter? And oh, I'm thinking about my shopping list. I'm bringing it back to the breath. I'm in distress. Is it me? Is it them? All those things work at, and like I'm also doing a psychic reading. So there's sort of that's a different thing. When I'm doing a psychic reading, there's a part of me that is feeling the energy connection or seeing things, but there's another part of me that's very tuned into my client, and so it's having like split attention where I really also need to be there for my clients. It's not good to, if you're totally trance channeling, then who's there with the client, right? And that's so I have a split attention on that I'm just used to. And as I've done this for, over the years, like my ability to concentrate has gotten a lot stronger. So I can do 4 sessions in a day pretty comfortably, but I can't do more than that because I just can't concentrate any longer.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you're talking about too, that I think is a very common question in classes and learning about people's psychic ability is how to share
Mhm.
and with the client. And I know one of the things, of course, that we teach is you're never responsible to share if something is like out of your scope of practice or what is going to be comfortable either for you or for the client. And I know for myself, as I'm channeling out loud, I'm always that kind of step ahead of the words coming out of my mouth
Yeah.
so that I'm observing at the same time, like you say, paying attention to the client, what is their capacity to hear. And then also I do ask Reiki to kind of monitor that for me, that I'm not seeing something that client wouldn't want me to see
Mm-hmm.
or perceive is a better word.
Yeah.
Can you talk a
Super
little bit
important.
about all of that part of it?
Yeah, ethics. So to me, this goes down under the category of ethics. And sadly, not very many psychics are trained well enough in ethics. And I think the Reiki practitioners in general are more aware of ethics, but a lot of times psychics don't have any training. They're self-taught, or nobody just ever told them that, that we have a very, very, very deep ethical responsibility about what we say and how we say it, especially in a Reiki session, because basically that person's like in a hypnotic trance. They're very open to suggestion. So they also put a lot of investment in what we say, you know. And so we are planting seeds, and we need to be think responsibly about, are we planting seeds for the good? Are we planting seeds for the bad? In general, I teach my students a sort of don't ask, don't tell policy. If less somebody asks you, and this is just when you're out in the world, don't share your psychic information without permission. It's not okay to do psychic hit and runs, to walk up to strangers and tell them things without their permission, to share psychic information with your friends or family without their permission. We see people do this on TV all the time, as psychics, and that's not even real, because I've been on some of those TV shows, and it's all staged. It's all everybody signed 100 waivers. It's all been rehearsed. There's that sort of idea of spontaneously walking into a store and trying on a pair of shoes and just out of the blue blurting out to the shoe lady that her dead mother is there. And that's just no. We're not doing that. And the same thing goes in a Reiki session. And I'll say, well, people are coming to me for psychic readings. And even then, if I feel like it's taking a turn into the unexpected or the deep, I ask permission. Well, I feel like, your mom is here. Do you want to talk to her? Because I don't assume that everyone does. You know,
Yeah.
I feel, I'm seeing a past life. Do you want to hear about it? Because I'm not going to make that assumption for them that they do, especially if it's a dicey one. I'll be like, it's a little dicey, this one. Do you want to hear about it? So even in a session, I'm continually asking permission to share the next thing, so that people always feel like they can say no. And I knew right away, especially when I started working as a professional psychic, that I would never have any friends if I just blurted out all the stuff I see about people all the time. People have a right to their privacy. And we need to respect that, you know? And so I'll see things and I just kind of like, swipe left.
Swipe left.
Yeah, swipe left.
Swipe right, whatever it is.
I'm not going like and
Out.
nope. And I let that one go. I breathe it. I forget it. I breathe it out. I forget about it. Oftentimes I pray. So I pray. I send Reiki. I bless things that I'm like, oh, that's really hard to see that, you know. And then even when I pray and send Reiki, and I think this ethical thing comes up a lot when we talk about distance Reiki, right? That there needs to be this checking our agenda at the door as Reiki practitioners. Like we we often I'm going to pray that that person gets better. I'm going to pray, I'm going to send Reiki. Well, what if it's their time to die? And by putting all this force on them getting better, we're preventing or interfering with the natural process of life and death. So sending sort of general, like, for the good of all and with harm to none. And I'm the first one to admit I have no idea what that is. That's between you and divine source. I don't know what. Here's a bunch of energy. Take it if you want it. If you don't want it, we're going to ground it into the earth. If you see an ambulance zooming by, you can, I learned this technique, the Reiki blanket. You throw the Reiki blanket over that situation. But with a caveat, if this person accepts it, and if this person doesn't want to accept it, then to the first responders, to the family, to the people at the hospital, and if none of them want to, then to the earth, because the earth always needs it. So we have to put in that, we have to take out our agenda. And I mean, I've had like people say, can I send Reiki to stop my daughter from marrying this scoundrel that she's dating? And I'm like, no, that's black magic. We can't interfere with people's free will. Even when we think we know better, because we really don't. And that's where you have to check your agenda, your ego. And of course we have that. Of course, if it's your family member, you don't want them to die. Of course you don't. And like, it's not really our business to get in the middle of that. So for me, the ethics is understanding, I don't know, understanding and sort of generally offering, like, here's a bunch of energy, here's a bunch of prayer, here's a bunch of well wish. I don't know, it's yours or not. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Discernment is so important with all of this. And it is, and also there's discernment around certain situations that you're in with Reiki. Like if you're volunteering in a medical facility, it's inappropriate with, especially with people that you don't know, it's usually inappropriate to share psychic impressions. If you're,
Right.
volunteering like that, you're there to give straight Reiki.
Yes.
And so there's time and place. And you know, the one thing that I like about combining these modalities with Reiki, and it's not to say it doesn't exist in other modalities as well, but one of the things that I like about combining these things with Reiki is that even if you don't share, even if you get an impression and let's say you're in the middle of a session and you don't share, Reiki's still going to handle it, right?
Right.
It's still going to go to whatever that client needs around it. I had this happen in a session recently with someone, and uh, it was when I actually moved to her hips. She had a sibling that had passed in a pretty tragic way, and there was so much stress that was locked into the hips around that. And it was the first session with this person. They knew that, I channel out loud, but at the same time, as we say, never scare the client. We hadn't really talked about that level of emotional healing that could come from a Reiki session, or the things shared from the Reiki session that, that wasn't really a part of what she was looking for in the session. And
Yeah.
so, and as I was just sharing with her, you have some release that's happening here in your hips, some of the stress and tension, and filling it with Reiki. And just knowing, and she had kind of even asked, I said, she's like, is there any further information around that? And I was like, just kind of releasing some of the grief with this sibling, but not going into the detail that it could have gone into with that. Because I just didn't feel like, you know, it's really dialoguing, listening. I didn't need to bring this sibling in. And because there was just this indication around it that it's not what she needed in that moment. It's not really what we had kind of talked about in the beginning. And that was just my intuition around it. But the whole point of that is just knowing that however that needs to be processed in this moment, like, okay, I'm just going to send Reiki into it, knowing that Reiki or, you know, any guides or higher level of her, you know, her higher self, that's just going to be able to take care of it. And I don't need to share in this moment because of all of those other parameters around it that I can just ask Reiki, you know, take care of this. And that is one of the things that I love about whether it's Reiki, whether it's sound healing, whether it's any of these other modalities that people use, spirit guides. They know that it's going to take care of it. And I don't need to go into the detail. And in other sessions, I might have. In other sessions, you know, it might have been fully appropriate to do that and just, you know, go fully into it. But it is, again, it was that dialogue with it about what she needed in that moment, but that I could also feel confident in leaving the session knowing that Reiki's just going to take care of this, like however she needs it in on her path.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. That's such a beautiful example. And I think it's super important to not, um, I don't know, sometimes we see things in sessions or we know things to really not, to let the client, unless you're a therapist, and even then, if you are a therapist, let the client lead the session to the depth that they're, you know, ready. And I'm sure we've all had sessions where people walk in and you're like, oh my God, what happened to you? What trauma have you been through? Or we even see their trauma and we're like, oh my Lord, you know? And we can't see that. We can't really say like, I mean, I've done so many cleanup sessions and people who have just been jacked up by bad psychics and bad, you
Yeah.
know, oh, you were abused when you were a child and you don't remember. What? 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 You know, why would you say that to somebody? That what if you're wrong? Because the best psychic in the world is only right 80% of the time. Now you've planted an evil seed in somebody. You know, if they come to you and people come to me and they say, I think I was abused as a child. Can you use your psychic ability to check? And my answer is no. My answer is no. I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm not going to tell you when you're going to die. I don't even get that information. You know, I've had people say, you know, oh, there's a curse. This is common scam, but there's a curse on your family and $10,000 to remove the curse, but you have to pay in cash and don't tell your husband. You
Yeah.
know, like that. Like there are just certain things that one person said, you have cancer, but the doctors will never find it. I'm like,
Yikes.
what a mind
Oh my
screw
gosh.
that is, you know, like this. And because of the power of belief, if the client really believed that, she's like, wait, I have cancer, I have cancer, I can't, like, is her body then going to make cancer? Because we really deeply believe things. Sometimes we can do that. And so we really have to, I mean, those are extreme examples of, you know, pretty horrible things that, you know, badly trained psychics or scammers have said. And I mean, sometimes people are outright scamming, but sometimes they just don't, I'm assuming they're coming from a good, um, you know, standpoint, but they're not well trained. And newbie psychics often just hit the astral plane. They're hitting the astral level. And the astral level of our spiritual self is our hopes and fears. So that's kind of like you go to the tea room, there's nothing wrong with tea rooms. It's just an example. And you have your tea leaves read and the psychic, or your tarot cards read. And the psychic says you're going to meet a tall, dark stranger and your family has a curse, you know, and that's a hope and that's a fear. And it rings true to you because it's a real hope and a real fear. And you might be like, oh my God, that psychic was so accurate. They really, you know, I really felt the truth of what they were saying, but it's not the truth of reality or possibility. It's just the hopes and fears. Does that make sense? So it
Yeah.
takes some training as psychics to get out of the astral and to make, like, you know, we're really tuned into people's trauma in the astral plane. So we need to rise above that and go to higher levels of connection in order to get more clear information. And, my first psychic teacher, my old school psychics would talk about clearing the channel. We need to understand that as humans, our channels are never 100% clear. We're human beings that have our own opinions and our own, traumas and our own view. Like that is filtering through us, and doing the best we can to clear our stuff out of the way is a lifelong process. We never stop. I've never stopped.
Yeah.
Working on myself and trying to learn the difference between what's my stuff, my opinion, my trauma, what my stuff, and just the information that's coming through.
That's a really fascinating description of that, and that astral plane and the hopes and fears. Because I do think that's a place, like I can tell for myself when I'm there and need to say, go deeper in, which
Yeah,
for me, I use the distance symbol for that.
great.
Like that bridge of light, go in deeper, go to the next level, because, or even particularly when somebody is telling me their hopes or their fears and asking me to identify with that, or to be more psychic with it. And I know I'm in that plane with them. Like you can feel the difference, or you're in their personality plane.
Yeah.
And need to go deeper within. And so it actually feels like I'm well, I would describe my intuitive or psychic ability as very metaphorical clairvoyance. So I see things, but they're in a metaphor. So
Yep.
it's not like an identical, I'm seeing identically what's there. And so, I will imagine myself or intend that I'm moving through that astral plane using that distance symbol to go deeper into that soul level, or into that higher consciousness level.
Beautiful. I love that.
One of the things that we were talking about, I want to make sure that we talk about again too, that you were talking about with the ethics of it, is staying within the scope of our practice and what we actually have the skills to participate in. So for instance, even though I'm very psychic and very skilled with all of it, I'm not a therapist. I don't have training in therapy, and I stay within the scope of my practice. I'm not a medical intuitive. I'm not a predictive psychic, that's for sure. I don't know the accuracy of my predictions. I haven't ever really gone there. I'm sure that it would be a training or a skill I could develop better than I have. But I've never asked to do that because I'm staying in the scope of my practice to do the healing and empowerment work. And so that's my psychic ability actually wraps around that and what it shows, or what is revealed from that. So can you talk a little bit more about that scope of practice part of it and
Yeah.
the
So
ethics of that?
important. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that into the conversation. And I want to say this is where your network or your Rolodex is your best friend.
Yes.
And like making sure that you have like a referral network of other healers that you can refer out to, couples therapists, are one of my biggest referrals. And you, we don't work, or we can be a part of a team, you know, but we can't really be the sole caretaker of somebody that has like a really serious mental health issue, or really, chronic illness, really serious, like they're chronically ill or terminally ill. We can be a part of that. But I will often um, understand, like, if someone's bringing up a lot of trauma, say, if you're not a therapist or not a trauma-based therapist, I'm going to refer you to somebody who is. Like, this is the person that, or an addiction specialist, or a couples therapist, or, a body worker, cranial sacral worker, like we can't do everything. So we need to bring in our referral network, and it's okay to own that that's not your thing. And, haven't been trained in that. It's not my thing, but here's a couple of options for you. I think you need that. and that's but that person's not me, or it might be beneficial for you if you do that. So everywhere I go, I collect people's cards. I collect, somebody's like, oh, I found a really great chiropractor. I'm like, who is it? And
Yeah,
I collect that information so that I can network and resource my clients into the things that are not my specialty. Yeah.
absolutely. And that's one of the things we talk about, that often the benefit with Reiki is it will provide those or highlight those resources. And
Mhm.
we do move into that complementary role with
Yeah.
what we are doing, is complementing the
Yes.
other therapies. And
Mhm.
I do personally insist on it
Yeah.
as a practitioner.
Yeah, me too. So if I have somebody who's really like terminally ill or really struggling with their mental health, I'm like, I cannot be your only person.
Yeah.
I'll be uh, on your team, but you need to have a proper medical doctor and a real therapist, or a therapist who's trained in the thing that you're dealing with. Um, I and I think what's unfortunate and very common these days is people are so dissatisfied with the medical world and the mental health world that they're like, no, like they've given up on finding solutions there, and they're coming to people like us. I have sort of I have a year-long apprentice program where I train people to be professional psychic healers. And I do 3 months of business training, 3 months of psychic development, 3 months of clinical work. Like, so because you can get clients, but what do you do with your clients once you've got them? Now you have to be a clinician. And I've done over 15,000 individual sessions, probably more. It's probably more than that. That was in 2018. And I only know that because my publisher made me count. Um, but what do we do how do we hold our presence when someone's really dishing their trauma? We have to worry about secondary trauma. That's when we're traumatized by other people's trauma. And I mean, I've been doing this a long, long time. And on the regular basis, I still hear stories that I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe that I'm like, what the heck is wrong with the world? I call them the what the heck is wrong with the world sessions, because I'm like stunned by and in awe of the human spirit for us to be able to survive the things that happen to us as humans. So how we need skills. I always say nobody comes to my office because they're having a good day. And how do we then deal with that? How do we stay present, stay grounded, stay safe, stay protected, stay connected to our client, even when we all have to become trauma informed enough so that we can handle just what, and then refer out, right, to the things where we're not trained. And it's tricky. It's really, and one of my students said to me, can I just work on happy people? I just want to work on the I just want to work on the people that have no problems. I'm like, good luck. Well, if you ever figure out where to find that, let me know, because that's not how this works, really. That's as far as I can tell. So, um, and then level that up by 100 if you're an empath.
Yeah.
So again, energy management, presence practices. How do we maintain our presence regardless of what's happening in a session? How do we caretake ourselves after? And for a long time I had a supervisor. So I worked with a person who was a clinical PhD psychotherapist, and I would be like, what, this thing happened in a session, I had no idea what to do. I had no idea what to say. And how do I handle that? And I would go, and now I offer that to my students. I learned a lot in that phase of my practice. Um, how to, because you just never know what's going to walk through your door any given day, really.
And that was another thing that I wanted to bring up for people listening to, is that we do have so much of that, our clientele with really challenging things. At the
Mm,
same time, as practitioners, you do get to choose your scope of practice.
yeah.
So, for instance, I have colleagues that work in death row and prisons, and I
Right.
don't feel called to that. And I get to decide that part of my practice and what
Yeah.
is my Reiki practice and it's not likely that I'm going to have everybody come in that's happy. Although some do, they're just maintaining their happiness. One of the topics, we have a podcast after you that we're talking about joy and bringing in the energy of joy. But I think that that's something important for people to realize too, because often we can feel that compelling, save the world, I can help. And we also, in our own self-care, do get to choose the scope of our practice,
Yes.
what levels we are skilled and comfortable to work in. And of course, then that develops over time too. But initially, I definitely felt like I needed the easier clientele
Yeah.
till I could understand my own abilities.
Yeah, so beautiful that to bring that up. And I think like a lot of us feel this is a calling, like that person who's working on death row, there's a calling or you don't do it. Like, same thing with hospice care. People feel really called to do that. And it's such a beautiful application of our gifts, and it requires extra training. It requires, additional training into what most Reiki practitioners learn in sort of their standard Reiki practice. Or you were talking about animal Reiki. That's beautiful, and it needs extra training. I love sort of specializing and then supporting yourself with the skills that you need to feel comfortable doing that, so that it becomes your scope of work. Um, and to honor that calling with additional support, so you're not sort of feel like you're hanging out on the skinny edges of the branches by yourself, where you don't know what you're doing and you don't feel comfortable. Like, we don't have to do it that way. We can continue to get support and training, and we should continue to get support and training, especially if we have one of those tough ones, if your calling is taking you into the deep water there.
Well, I remember when I was when I was in shamanic training, and it was already extensive training for my
Yeah.
first 3 years before I had Reiki. And it never occurred to me that I could work in the healing fields because of my empathy and that inability to discern what was theirs and what was mine. And so I did, I worked on family and friends and things like that because I was in the school and I had plenty of other students that I could work with. And then when I received Reiki, that is when it changed for me because of that Reiki energy coming in to do the work. And that was a huge difference for me, is understanding it's no longer my own life force energy output. It's now, as you had said earlier, the energy coming through your crown, coming through you for them. And it's not mine. I'm not doing that output. And of course, in my shamanic training, it wasn't, I certainly wasn't trained to only use my own energy, although some of that training did have those as well. Another one you brought up earlier that I think, and you talked about doing a lot of cleanup work. I'm definitely in support of plant medicines, but also I do see in that area of inexperienced practitioners
Yes.
teaching the plant medicine, and it can open people so quickly without the support.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Because again, I'm in support of it.
Yeah, I am too. And it's a
So,
really powerful tool. So we have to be super careful with it. And I've done a lot of cleanup sessions there too, with people that just got blown open. I feel ayahuasca is the one that tends to really do a number on people. And often it's people that have had a lot of trauma and just haven't done a lot of work on that. They haven't maybe had therapy, or this may be their kind of first venture into cleaning up trauma. And I think we want to be really, really careful when we choose plant medicine practitioners, that we choose, don't do the backyard Aya ceremony with, that there's 100 people and one facilitator. Don't do that. Don't make sure, and the follow-up after that. So the integration and the follow-up is just as important as the initial journey, where I think really the transmutation happens is actually in the follow-up session. So regardless of what kind of plant medicine you're using, I see a pattern of sort of it's a temporary fix, and then you go back for more, and you go back for more, and you go back for more. But if you're not doing that integration, working with a therapist or a healer to help you uncover that, it sort of rips the band-aid off sometimes, or rips the scab off the wound, and then that wound needs extra care. So it can fast track you, but please work with somebody who knows what they're doing. Please get really, really good aftercare, so that you can integrate. And I've seen, like, psychotic people become psychotic and end up in mental hospitals. I've seen people have like massive Kundalini experiences that they then, fry their nervous system out some way and are really worse off than they were. So, especially if you have a lot of trauma. And I'm a huge fan, believe me. My son's a veteran, so he came out of the Marines pretty jacked up, and found plant medicine to be helpful for his, integrating his experiences. So I know it works. Ketamine works, MDMA works, mushrooms work, but all of those things, even Aya works. We just have to be so careful because it's so powerful, and make sure we're really, really, really supported before, during, and after. That's my feeling. What do you think? What do you do?
Agreed.
You
And
agree?
most, I would say that, where you see the practitioners that are really experienced have that as a part of their
Yeah,
practicing.
it's built in.
They're,
Built in.
yeah, it's built in. You're going to have before, during, and after care as well. And I think
Right.
that's where you see, um, like you said, that's where you can really see some of the times when people struggle with it, is when they aren't doing that as a part of it. But I think that
Yeah.
that's one of the places that you can discern who's an experienced and good practitioner around it, is they have that as a part of their program, or at least, like you said, they have that Rolodex where they have people that can support. Maybe they don't do the aftercare, but they're like, no, here's what you need to do after.
Right.
That they're going to have that as a part of their practicing aspects of it.
Yeah. And when it's done well, it can be incredibly
Yes.
powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and with the increase in the use of microdosing and mushrooms, particularly here in Oregon, it's been legalized. Not just like you can't just go buy it on the street, but um, legalization is helping with some of that, and developing skilled practitioners
Right.
to help the people as they're going through these processes. So I just wanted to mention that because, again, we are in fact, we're having a podcast coming up with somebody who's highly skilled in these areas. So I just wanted to bring that up because
Yeah.
it's attractive, and it's attractive to me. I love
Yep.
altered states. It's part of what fascinates me with Reiki and being psychic, is having that capability of going deeper into the world and my life, and the reality that we actually live in. And so I love the idea of it. I just always want to encourage people to really investigate who they're doing this work with, and making sure they are choosing well.
Yes.
I
Agreed.
I also want to add, though, that, it isn't necessarily a calling for everybody, or there are people that can't do it because of various reasons, whether it's sobriety, or whether it's, like I have epilepsy, things like that, that make it so that or maybe it's not recommended by a mental health practitioner, like you said, that can lead to, some psychosis, things like that. That there are ways that you can reach altered states without doing plant medicine as well, and using plant medicine. As Colleen said, we're in very big support of it. And speaking
Yeah.
of Maharaji, that was one of the reasons that Ram Dass learned the things that he learned, is because he said, well, I did LSD and it was this great awakening for him, but I couldn't maintain that state. So I
Right.
wanted to learn how to do this, kind of be in this kind of constant state or be able to reach those states without that level of come down with, and why the transcendental meditation movement, like where that was sort of born out of. And so there also are ways that you can reach those states without plant medicine as well. So
Breath
if
work.
you're
Breath work is really good
breath
for you.
work,
That's right.
yes,
Yeah.
right?
We
Yeah,
give you
you
the
can
same kind of
absolutely.
buzz, but without the buzz.
Yeah, exactly. So, I just want to mention that as well. And then the other thing is that I know we have listeners on all spectrum of experience when it comes to these ways, and most people find our podcast through Reiki. And so if you're brand new to Reiki and you're like, I don't even know where to put my hands yet, like, how do you draw the distance symbol? I don't know how to do any of that. And just remember also that this is a long time of experience, right? I mean, Lisa, you've been doing this for 30 years plus. Colleen, you as well. I've been doing it, well, since I was a kid, but professionally for 10 years. I mean, so there's a lot of experience here, and this is all available to you. But if you're just starting out and still trying to even just learn those basics, that you know you'll either get there or you'll find your path, or all of that. And then also this is all available to you, as you take your Reiki path, or you take this spiritual path, where it can guide you to the practices, to the ways that you're called to. And I know for some people that are also just starting out, that hearing like, oh, that's what that is that's happening for you, like you, Lisa, like you were talking about, there are ways to be able to support you in those as well.
Mm. Yeah. I think like I have a lot of faith and trust and belief in people's innate wisdom.
Yeah.
Like we're all so wise. And even if you're starting your spiritual journey, you're still so wise.
Mhm.
And so tuning into what feels right for you. Let's take a gentle path. Let's, ask for the unfoldment to happen joyfully and gently. And honoring that your path is unique and the pace of your path is unique, and that you're going to know that if you allow yourself to know that, if you tune in and really listen. To me, that's so like we're sovereign beings, and I deeply, deeply respect the sovereignty of everyone's path. And I know we can feel that um when we tune into our own hearts and our own bellies, like what's right for you, what's the pace that's right for you, what tools do you want to add to your toolkit that feel right for you. And you might experience that as curiosity or a calling, or like a desire to learn something, and that feels very purposeful and part of the pattern in a good way.
I love it. Well, I know we're probably running into your timing as you are on vacation. I think what I'd love to do is just finish up with maybe a fun psychic experience um, that you'd like to share, because we've talked about some of the more serious ones,
Yeah.
and the reason that's happening is I'm hearing it in my ear. Tell them about me. And since we were just talking about mushrooms, and I was doing a session with somebody, and I knew this was something I knew nothing about. Mycelia came in,
Mm,
the mycelium in the earth that came in for this person to, really let the energetics of the mycelia go through his body, and to like empower that part of us. And it started talking about how I was in Egypt, and it's crazy, it was a year ago, but I was in Egypt and I was in Sekhmet's temple. And she said, you need to learn to ask the questions that you don't know you have. Like, let those questions come through. So when this information came through in the mycelia, it was saying, well, we have the answer. it is the most successful organism on the
Yeah.
planet. Ask it.
Wow.
Ask it for information. So anyway, I
That's
could go
cool.
into depth with that. I won't. We're at the end of it, but I thought, well, it'd be fun to just share something fun with the psychic ability. Oh, one other thing I want to remember to say, because it's popping in my head too, is when Robin was talking about the beginners, one of the things to know through all the psychic abilities when we're working with Reiki, Reiki is still doing the work. And the Reiki is not dependent on our psychic ability.
Right.
So just wanted to
It's a
say
good
that. But
point.
anyway,
Yeah.
that's where I wanted to go with it.
That's neat. Yeah, I feel like this psychic and the intuition is in service of the healing to bring more information, you know. Um, yeah, they blend really well together. But I have a lot of like my guides have a pretty funny sense of humor. So for me, my and I learn better through humor. So there's always like coincidences, flow, you know, crazy power animals. I love working with power animals. So they're just the craziest things happen to me with animals. Like, you know, there's a snake in my basement. There's a hawk sitting on the roof of my car in the morning. Like I'm driving down the road and a cardinal flies through the open window and out the other window and drops a feather in my lap. I was asking for a sign. I'm like, oh, I was having some like dark night of the soul, like I've lost a faith moment. And I think that when we're in the flow of our own soul's evolution, it's magical, it's joyful, it's fun, where things align up, it's easy, things align, open, doors open, and those signs and omens show up to highlight, they'll like pay attention, and yes, you're going in the right direction. So I feel like there's this beautiful moment where we step into alignment on our path, and then the universe meets us halfway, like by throwing a big party. And of course, we have moments that we have to deal with difficulties, or we're clearing stuff, or we're working through pain. But for the most part, on the other end of that is another joyful moment, another opening, another like it's really all about feeling more joy, peace, love, and hope, as far as I can tell. And as we clear the blocks, we move more and more into that.
And the fun of it.
Yes.
So, like you
Well,
say, it can be fun. It's really
Yeah.
funny. Yeah.
Lisa, how do people find you? If you want to go ahead and mention that, maybe some of your offerings and things of that
Sure.
nature.
Thank you. Yeah, you can find me at my website, lisacampion.com. I teach online psychic Reiki, which is Reiki plus psychic development, and you can find all the classes there online. And I also teach all levels of psychic development, from beginner, intermediate, pro level, and really pro, like you want to quit your day job and go absolutely pro. I have all those available. I have a YouTube channel with a lot of free resources, and I also have a lot of free resources on my website. So you can tune into my podcast. It's called The Miracle of Healing. You can find it on any podcast channel. And I'm on all the socials too, Instagram and Facebook. So if you want to find me, that's how you can. And I hope that you stop by if you feel like it can help. I'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. And can it all be in the show notes? We'll and descriptions. We'll put her information and website and everything in that. But her last name is spelled Campion, is like champion without the H. So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
how you can find her at lisacampion.com. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation, and just thank you for all of the work that you're doing and for people and the training. And it's such important work. And just really appreciate you. So
Oh,
Very
well,
much.
thank you, Colleen and Robbins, for having me on your amazing podcast. It was super fun conversation. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you. Really fun and great information for our listeners too. It's such an important topic. And like you say, we all have the ability, and some are more aware of the ability, but we just also it is still a skill. And so it's something that we learn, just like you may have a natural aptitude for music, but you still need to, have teachers and lessons and things like that.
Yes.
Because self-teaching can be a challenging way to go. It's not that it's not doable, but
Yes.
anyway, well, thank you so much,
Thank
Lisa.
you.
Wow. And go ahead and say the names of your books one more time.
So The Art of Psychic Reiki, Energy Healing for Empaths, Awakening Your Psychic Ability, and the Psychic Awakening Journal.
And are those also available on Amazon?
Yeah, you can get them anywhere books are sold, including Amazon. Yeah.
Great.
Fantastic.
Okay.
All right. Well, and we can be found at ReikiLifestyle.com. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Bye.